Today is December 18th, 1984. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Judge William A. Berry. Sir, where were you born?
I was born in a little town in Payne County, south and east of Stillwater, Ripley, Oklahoma.
And when's your birthday?
December 28th, 1915.
Who was your father?
Thomas Nelson Berry.
And your mother?
Harriet Virginia Patten. There are pictures on the wall there.
What work did your father do?
Well, my father was a farmer, and he actually made the early run when he was a very young boy. That was in 1889. And he came in on the back end of a wagon with an uncle of his, George Berry, who was my grandfather's brother, and they settled near Pawnee, Oklahoma. My grandfather didn't come into Oklahoma until about 1912. And when he came to Oklahoma, he bought into the Stillwater National Bank. I think bought half interest. At that time it was the First National. And I think someone by the name of Kaiser owned the bank, and my grandfather bought half interest. But when my father came along, he cared nothing about banking and preferred farming. He grew cattle, grew hogs, grew corn, cotton, wheat, what have you.
When did your family move from near Pawnee to Ripley?
My family never moved in Pawnee. Only my father went in there when he was a small boy with this uncle who did settle in Pawnee, and that was George Berry. As a matter of fact, George Berry was at the Constitutional Convention that wrote the Constitution of Oklahoma. He was a delegate from that area. But when my father was a little older, I think when he was 19, he made another run. I think it was a Cherokee Strip.
That was 93. 93?
93.
Yeah.
But he made that, and he was, anyway, not old enough to stake a claim, but my grandfather went with him, and the two of them staked a claim. My father lived on it for 4 years to prove it up. At the end of 4 years, went in to file the final papers and found out someone else had a stake on it, had a claim filed before, and he took that case all the way to the Supreme Court. He and his father did, and he lost. So he lost all of his work that he'd put into it, and all the hardships and sacrifice that were involved. But my grandfather then had sufficient funds to lend him some money to buy a farm, which he did, and that's down by Ripley, Oklahoma.
How could someone go in and claim the homestead after underneath of someone?
Someone was on the joining property, as I understand it. And when he filed a claim, he included the property my father was on. But he had filed his claim prior to mine, prior to my father's claim, and therefore had a priority.
And your father never knew this?
I didn't know it when he was proving it up. But the neighbor ended up with the property that he had tried to prove. Thought he was proving that.
Did your father ever talk about making the runs?
Very little to me. My father was much older than I was. His birthday, I think he was born in 1873. So, and I was born in 1915, and he would have been in I think 43 years older than I am. So, and being the father of 8 children, when I came along, I think he was too tired to talk to me and visit with me much. One of my early remembrances, I was 3 years old, and being almost Christmas time now, I was thinking about that just recently. But here I was 3 years old, and I heard it was in the early morning. I mean, it was rather dark, and I'd say it was before around 7 o'clock, so it was still dark at that time of the year. And I got out of bed and saw light coming from the dining room and kitchen area. I'm not sure we even had a dining room in that small house, but anyway, a room off the kitchen. And I peeked around the corner. We had coil oil lights in those days. No electricity in Ripley. And as I looked around the corner, I saw my mother and my dad in there. And Mother was trying to get Dad to put on an old fur coat and a belt with bells on it, and some whiskers and a funny hat. And I peeked in and watched them. And then subsequently I came into the room, and Dad had gone into another room then, but when he came back in, he was trying to be Santa Claus. But I looked at him and looked at my mother, and I said, "Why is Dad dressed up in that silly suit?" And it spoiled the whole Christmas at that time, but they got over it. I think they laughed. But that's my first Christmas that I remember. I'd be 3 years old at the time.
On the farm, what chores did you do?
Well, I left. This was not on the farm. This was in the little town of Ripley. But in those days, we'd moved from the farm, which was during the summertime and during the period that crops would be growing. And the winter time, we'd come back to the town, and we'd go to school with older brothers and sisters. That was a procedure that we followed. And so I was only 5 years old when we moved to Stillwater, and I started school when I was 5, and had gone the first year to Ripley, but then we moved to Stillwater, and I started then in I think the 2nd grade.
How large was the school at Ripley?
Oh, it was. I don't think the whole town was over 500 people. I think it's larger then than it is now. You know, it had a drugstore, and there was a movie that would take place on Saturday night, once in a while it would, and a hardware store, and a few places of that kind. The farmers would come in and trade.
Who did they name the town of Ripley after?
Pardon?
Who was the namesake of Ripley?
I haven't any idea.
Are you familiar with Paynes Colony that was around Stillwater?
Oh, I've read about it some.
Okay.
But the Paine County was named after that Paine.
And who named the town of Stillwater? Or why did they call it Stillwater?
There was a creek, and I think it had something to do with the Stillwater Creek. And I don't know those names. I haven't run the history down. I do have a book at home that I glanced through to some extent, written by Robert Cunningham at Stillwater, that goes into that. But he's written 2 or 3 books on this area up there, historical books.
Could you give a good description of what Stillwater looked like when you first moved there?
Well, there were very, very few. Well, there weren't paved streets. They had some brick streets. I think there were about 2 brick streets. One was Main Street, and there was a little bit of Lewis Street that was brick. And Main Street was on one street. And of course, it was where Oklahoma State University is. Well, it's there now. It was Oklahoma Agriculture and Mechanical College in those days. But I think when I moved there, the population the enrollment at the school was about 4,000 students. And I think when I eventually did move away from Stillwater, or when I graduated up there in 1937 or 39 it would be, it was my actual date of my degree, it was about 8,000. But Stillwater was just a small town. But they did have electricity, they did have running water, and so I was introduced to electricity and running water when I moved to Stillwater, and when I was 5 years old. It was about 1920. But my older brothers and my older sisters were then ready for college, and that was the purpose that we moved up there. My father and mother wanted to educate the children at the school.
Tell us about your years at A&M.
Well, I first started there in 1933. I graduated from high school at midterm. There was no graduation ceremony. I just completed my work, high school activities in 33 in January. I think I received a diploma from there dated 33, or 34, I'm not sure which. And then went to the school. It had, I loved high school. Of course, senior year and the junior year in high school were years that I remember very fondly. Matter of fact, I went back to my 50th anniversary of the high school last year, or the year before last. But Old Central was used in those days. I think it was it was an administration type building when I first went there. At least when I enrolled in Oklahoma A&M. I did my enrolling in Old Central.
Have you been?
And I took a class or two there.
Have you been inside Old Central recently?
I haven't been in, I don't think in 20
No,
years.
it's been restored as a museum.
Yes, I haven't been back to that building in 20 years. I don't even remember the last time I was there. It was more of a historical marker at that time. It had been preserved.
How did the Depression affect Stillwater and your days in high school?
Well, of course, everyone did have to watch things closely during the Depression. Everybody suffered by it, but in thinking back on it, seems to me we just took it as one of those things that we just really, I was too young and too uninvolved, where it didn't seem to affect my situation.
Was your family still in banking at that time?
Well, my father never has been in banking.
Okay.
My uncle Jim Berry, who was lieutenant governor here for 20 years, and now deceased, but he was in the bank. But he was 10 years younger than my father. My father had no interest in banking.
Did that bank fail in Stillwater?
Oh, heavens no. Stillwater National, never. In fact, there hadn't been a bank failure up there to my knowledge ever.
What about in the crash in 29?
No. Bank holidays, I recall those. When that took place and couldn't cash checks, well, couldn't get any money, but checks were accepted in most places.
So Stillwater.
That's when Sil Goldman, his Humpty Dumpty stores, really started taking off during that period, because he adopted a policy which he instructed all of his stores to accept personal checks for groceries and the amount of the groceries, and he did that, and I understand it pretty well changed his whole marketing system, and he became, instead of a small grocery store owner, one of the bigger ones.
So the
he
bank
had a Humpty Dumpty.
Yeah, right. So the bank in Stillwater then weathered the Depression fairly well then.
Oh yes. Of course, the bank holiday, they got everything in order, but the bank at Stillwater's always been as sound as it could be. I still have an account there.
Why did so
Still
many?
own a little stock in the bank.
Yeah. Any reason why so many banks failed at that time?
No, except people couldn't pay their indebtedness. I mean, if a person loses his job, he has his home mortgage, and his check stops coming in, well, it's going to affect the banks. It's just the whole market went down on everything, and stocks just went to nothing. In small areas of that kind, weren't affected, though, the way the large ones were. And people weren't as much in debt in those days either.
I guess most people in Stillwater were either students or farmers?
Actually, Stillwater has been larger than the school all the way through. I think I'm really more or less one, but take the school away, and it would probably reduce the population of Stillwater about a third or less. But, of course, I don't know if the school were taken out of there, this whole economy of the area may drop considerably.
What was your major at A&M?
Well, my major there was history, but I had pre-law in mind, and I'd been, my advisors had told me that history would be a good major, but then when I convert to go to law school, and my major would be law, and my major at Stillwater would become a minor.
Who was head of the history department at A&M at that time?
At that time, I don't know. I remember the dean of men, McElroy, and I can't think of the dean of history. I remember some of the history teachers real well. That was 50 years ago almost.
Right. And so in 39, you got your degree. 39.
I had been to Norman, though, in law school for 2 years. I had really completed my hours in 38, but I didn't go back to get my degree till 39, or didn't get it. I never really went through the graduation ceremony at Stillwater at OSU at all. Just didn't quite do it.
Who was head of the law school at OU at that time?
Dean Manette.
Okay, he was there. Describe him.
Well, he was bald-headed, and as the students thought, he put wax on top of his head so it'd shine a little. He was a real nice-looking person. I think if he'd have had whiskers and this time of the year, we might have thought he looked a little like Santa Claus. But he taught contracts, and I always did well, and I think I made A's under him, so I appreciated that. But I liked him.
What was his personality?
Well, he was the dean and seemed very strict in a sense.
Was he a stern person, jovial?
Well, he didn't tell many jokes in the classroom, but I think he certainly seemed to have a warmth about him. I think he probably was about 5'10" or 11, and at that time he was getting up in years. I don't know, of course, up in years I was 21 or 22 years old, 21 when I went. But I don't know.
When did they name the law barn Monette Hall? Was that during his tenure there?
I I don't remember when it was named on that hall. When you asked me that, I just wasn't. If you'd asked me what the name of the building was, I couldn't have told you. Of course, now they've built a whole new law school.
Right.
I mean, the building, the construction part, which is way south of where it was.
Are you familiar with the, I want to say it's a sycamore tree.
Pardon?
I want to say it's a sycamore tree at every law school. It's a tradition.
I don't know. That it wasn't a tradition to my knowledge in those days.
Okay, I think it came from Greece where Socrates had Plato had his school.
Well, I hate to appear as too out of tune and unaware of the situation, but I'm not familiar with it.
Okay.
Of course, I might have known it one time. I think I've forgotten more than I've ever known. So.
Right. What started the rivalry between the law students and the engineers?
No, but there was one when I went there, and I remember one incident that had happened the year before of someone going up the flagpole on the engineering school and painting it green or something, or someone painting ours green. I don't know. There was a little conversation about it, but the buildings were not far from each other, and there was a rivalry.
What caused that? Any idea?
I haven't any idea. Those things just happened without really investigating the why or wherefore.
Just an ongoing tradition.
As far as I was concerned, I didn't really have much of a concern over it.
When did you get your law degree? What year?
1940.
1940. Remember who gave the commencement speech?
No, I don't. I know wasn't expected to be anything but boring, and I'm not sure I listened much.
After law school, where did you go?
Well, I went back to Stillwater, and I had never intended to practice law when I was in law school. I thought I'd get out and use it in a business sense, just like an education, a background for business. And I thought, goodness, what have I learned in law school? I'd better practice a while and see if I can't put it to a use and become familiar with some of the things before I just forget about it. So then I started practicing, and my first practice was with Phil Bennett. He's now one of the executives here in Kerr-McGee, and he graduated. Law school was in Virginia, and he had been out for about a year. But he came back to Stillwater, and we started a partnership, Bennett and Berry.
Now, is he related to Dr. Bennett?
He was Dr. Bennett's son, Henry G's son. Then we just barely started practicing. I think we'd tried one lawsuit, which was quite a thrill for us. An automobile accident, and I remember we got a judgment in it, which we thought was great. But the national emergency came along. We're talking about 1940.
Is this September 40?
This would have been sometime in September of 40, I think, that I'm talking about. The national emergency came along, and Phil was a captain with the, I think it's the 92nd, but I'm not sure. But he had commission in it. He was in the legal department. I think he was captain at the time, so he was called active duty. So that terminated the partnership, dissolved it. But there was a Curtis Williams who was assistant county attorney in Stillwater at that time. And he was, I believe he was with the 49th?
45th?
45th.
Yeah.
And he was called active duty. Or maybe he was in the same one Phil was in. So that left a vacancy in the county attorney's office, and Phil said he thought I'd have a good chance of going to the county attorney's office if I'd make an attempt for it, and so I did. I was looking for some experience and didn't know what to do then. so I was made assistant county attorney, and I was in that for a short time. And the county attorney, Dave Hervey, was a senior grade lieutenant in the Navy Reserve, and he was called to active duty. Then I was appointed county attorney of Payne County, and I was only 24. And I tried several cases in that capacity. It wasn't long after that someone came along and wanted me to put in an application with the Naval Intelligence. So I did, and first thing you know, I was called up into active duty too. I was on my way to the Philippines.
When were you called to active duty?
1941. My commission was about the 3rd day of September, I think.
What did you report?
I was ordered to report to San Pedro, California, waiting transportation to the Philippine Islands. So I was on my way to the Philippines. And I never received a day of training in the Navy whatsoever.
I was going to ask you, where'd you take your boot camp?
I didn't know the stern from the bow, and I didn't know. I was quite a novice.
What were your duties in the Navy?
Well, my first assignment was, I was to report to Cavite, a Navy yard there in the Philippines, which was just across the bay a little from Manila. That's where a Navy yard was. And then when I arrived in Manila, though, had been assigned to the district intelligence office in Manila. And I was a junior grade, I was an ensign, and my first duty was liaison between the Army Intelligence and the Navy. And what amounted to was just running dispatches back and forth, which I don't think any of them were that important, but they seemed highly important at the time.
Where were the Navy located?
Pardon?
Where was the Navy, the Army located, I'm sorry? You were at Cavite?
No, I never went to Cavite. I never went to Cavite. Matter of fact, it was bombed out. Clarkfield and Cavite were bombed out, the first bombing after the war started. There in Manila. I mean, I saw Cavite bombing from the street in Manila. I saw the planes go over Manila, and they went over Cavite and dropped bombs and wiped it out. It was just no longer used as a naval base after that.
When did you arrive in the Philippines?
I arrived there November the 17th, 1941.
And what were your thoughts on Pearl Harbor? I think the Philippines was December 8th when it was bombed.
It was bombed December the 8th over there. It was 7th here.
Mm-hmm.
So that was about 2 weeks after I arrived.
What were your first thoughts when you heard the news?
Well, we were sharing an apartment with an ensign Woodsides, Jack Woodsides, and Leland Chase. We had this apartment on Dewey Boulevard, Manila, beautiful apartment. 3 of us. We bought furniture, and we were all pretty well established. And I had us a houseboy at our Navy pay. 3 of us together. We lived quite well. But early that morning at the 8th, it was, I think, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. Jack Woodside came into the room and said, Lieutenant Leahy's on the telephone and says to get down there immediately. Pearl Harbor's been bombed. And Jack said, I think he's kidding us. He said, I told him, well, you're kidding. It can't be. And he said he got a little irritated, is what Jack related. And he said, what shall we do about it? And I said, I don't know what you're going to do. I'm going to get down there immediately. So I got down there as fast as I could. And I I didn't get off my feet for 36 hours. We never stopped, just everything running around.
Now, you said when you went down, where did you go?
Down to the District Intelligence Office.
Okay. Was that in Manila?
It was in Manila, down in what they call the port area, just right there by where they bring the ships into the harbor.
How long after that when the Japanese bombed Cavite?
Well, that was December the 8th. I would think about a week later.
Tell me about that, watching the Japanese planes
Well,
come in.
we were up in, I was at, I had lunch in the officers, bachelor's officers, quarters, where they had a dining room in this big building. And somebody yelled down below in the street that there were some planes coming over. So I went down and went out in the street and looked up, and the sky was just filled with bombers. And they were up there probably 20,000 feet high, or maybe not quite that high, but way up in the sky. And they were just sparkling like little silver things floating around. Perfect formation. They flew over Manila, and we didn't know whether they were American planes or what they were. And then they did a turn and went right over, and we saw them go over to Cavite. Well, we could see Cavite very faintly across the Manila Bay. And they started dropping bombs. Then we knew they were jet planes. And that took place. Wave after wave went over. Dropped bombs, and we could see the bursts. All this. Of course, I think I rushed on to the intelligence office. But the next thing we heard was it had been considered as nothing of any worth there, and there was no practicality to stay there. So they moved everything out that was left. But it was just one big heap of junk.
Where'd they move everything to?
Pardon?
Where did they move everything to?
Transferred what they could to Bataan and Corregidor. And around Subic Bay, Marvelis.
What were your thoughts between December 8th and the bombing of Cavite? What was the reaction to people in Manila?
Well, I didn't really realize how deadly all this business was there for a while. I mean, see, bombs over at Cavite, they didn't affect me much. But the first time the port area, when I was on duty in the District Intelligence Office, first time a bomb dropped around there, it shook me up good and just jarred things all over. And I ended up after a bomb drop under the desk with my head in a wastebasket. And I rushed outside, and I saw this a steel rail of a train, or of a streetcar or something, a steel rail, about 2 inches thick, and just a clean hole had been blown right through it by one of the fragments from a bomb going off. I thought, man, that is deadly, and it'd blow just clean holes through brick walls, and those are high explosive, and I started realizing that it was pretty serious business.
Now, were they bombing Manila at that time, the Japanese?
Well, they had, yes, this was the first immediate area that I was in which the bombs started dropping, first time. And then we kept getting the reports in the office. The Japs were coming in closer and closer and closer and circling and landing on the Grand Gulf and here and there over at down on the Big Hole Peninsula, and they were coming up. It became more serious all the time. Christmas Day then, we got the word, well, grab one suitcase and meet down at the yacht club, I think, in Manila. Just walk out, don't tell anybody anything, just leave. Bring what you can in one suitcase. So I did that. got on a little barge of some type and went to Corregidor. Manila had been declared an open city. That was December the 25th, Christmas Day, 1940. And then I was reassigned from the District Intelligence Office to the inshore patrol on Corregidor. And my duty was then to be a naval observer in control of the mine channels on Corregidor. And what I'd do, my first station was 85 feet above on the top side, which is the highest point on Corregidor, and 85 feet above the barracks up there, which is up way up in the air. And by two-way radio, they'd ask for mine clearance, which the Navy and the Army craft moving in and out of the harbor there, they'd have to get through the mines, and they'd want to make sure that they were clear. I mean, even though they knew the channel, they just didn't want the mines on as they went through.
So you could see the mines from where you were?
Oh, I couldn't see the mines. They were underwater.
Yeah.
But the channels, I could see where the boats went. Mines, but no, you wouldn't see them. I guess if you'd get on top of them, the water was clear enough, you could see them down there. Mm-hmm. But that was my first station.
This is between Corregidor and Bataan that the boats were going?
Yes.
Okay.
The Alisasson Channel separated Bataan from Corregidor. And I was on what they called topside, just overlooking, and way up, and I could just see the whole thing down there. The topside was some 400 feet higher than the water below, and I was 85 feet up there. And 3 days later, of course at that time we didn't think the Japs would dare fly over Corregidor, much less bomb it. But we found out a different situation on December 28th, which was 3 days later, which happened to be my birthday. And the Japs came over the same way they'd come over Cavite, and they dropped bombs. I had just come down from that 85-foot tower when the bombs started falling. And I jumped in a big ditch, concrete ditch. I mean, it's something that the water could drain off of. It's about 5 feet deep and maybe 6 or 8 feet wide, and several of us got in there. I was in that for probably 30 minutes, and then I jumped out and ran someplace else, and then these waves of bombers came over every 10 minutes. One time I was in an area which was no kind of a bomb-proof or no ditch or anything to get into, but just flat. And as I was there, I think I was at that place when the bombing was over, and I found an imprint of a bomb that had just sunk down into the ground, that hadn't gone off, that was probably about 20 feet from where I was lying during that part of that time. Then when we finally left, I remember this ensign who was my room with me in this bachelor officer's quarter, who was also really the senior officer with me on that observation post. We started looking around. We found where people, all kinds of things had happened. And we saw where one big crater was toppled over, and a slab of concrete caught a person's foot. But he had been able to get out of his shoes, so he wasn't there anymore, but he couldn't get his shoe out. Another, to me, extremely interesting situation. I mean, one that I recall back on because of the importance of the whole thing and the vividness that create on my mind anyway. I ran into Major Vance. Of course, I didn't know him, but in one of these places, I guess the last place I was, And he said, let's go see what happened to MacArthur. And I said, is MacArthur out here in this bombing? He said, yes. So we rushed up to where MacArthur's quarters were, which actually was only a few doors from this one this incident I moved into, but it was empty at that time. The wife had gone back, and the officer who had lived there, I guess, had gone some other quarter, but it was empty, and we moved in. When we got up to where MacArthur lived, his quarters, he was out walking around, and he was stepping off the sides of one of the bomb craters, which had dropped right by his house. And he said, well, he looked at it, and he spoke to Major Vance, and of course, there were three of us there together. He said, I imagine that was about a 200-pound bomb that dropped right there. And then he looked up at the sky. And he said, won't be long, we'll get some P-40s out here and some more planes, and we'll run those fellows away. Well, how wrong he was, I mean, in one sense, and how right he was in another. But he said, when this crater, he pointed it out, he said, when it went off, I crouched right here. Well, now that was unusual, because when those bombs were dropping around me, I was flat on my belly, just wanting to dig into the ground as far as I could. But he didn't even hit the ground, he just crouched. But he said the Filipino with me was hit by a piece of shrapnel, one standing by me. And he's gone to the sick bay to get patched up. And but I was amazed at his calmness during that thing, because I was just, my nerves were just about as tight as they could possibly be. I mean, it's inconceivable how when those bombs are dropping around, you can hear the whistling, and they just constant. And the artillery shooting from down below. Our artillery didn't even get up to the Jap planes. I think the Jap planes were about, maybe 18,000 feet, and our bombs were going off at about 14,000. I mean, our artillery bursts were about 14,000, and it didn't even phase the Jap planes. They were just over and over and back and back. It lasted, I want to say 2 hours. I mean, I want to say 4 hours, but I'm not sure whether 4 or 2, but it seemed eternity at the time.
How big is Corregidor?
I think at the widest point, it's shaped like a tadpole. And at the widest place, it's about 2 miles in diameter, and then it strings out maybe 4 or 5 or 6 miles.
Now, I've heard about the big tunnel on Corregidor.
That's Melinda Tunnel. That was the Army tunnel. The Navy had a tunnel they called Queen Tunnel. But it got to the point, immediately after that bombing up there, I was given a shelter, we'll say, in the quarters in the Queen Tunnel, the Navy tunnel. And I was there then for the rest of the time. But my duty was this naval observer. And at first I could go back and forth, and I'd have maybe 8-hour watches, and then increase to 18-hour watches. And then it increased to 36-hour watches, which meant I'd go up there and stay a day and a half and stay up on that and sleep on a cot up there. With a signalman, we'd take turns if one of us needed to sleep.
Is this the top, the highest point?
Well, we got off that one, and our observation point post was bombed out 3 different times. But fortunately, I wasn't on it. I mean, fortunately for me, not for others, I'll say. But
where was your observation point then when you were in the tunnel?
You mean then we talked about it was 3 different places.
Oh, 3 different places. Okay.
I mean, the last place it was in a one of the big batteries, artillery batteries that the Army had. I can't remember what the name of the battery was. I want to say Sunset, or I don't know. I could probably figure it out. The commanding officer of it was an Army Colonel Cohen. But And I know when the Japs came on to Bataan, and Bataan fell, these Japs were coming on, and they opened up artillery from this place where we were. Of course, the big guns only pointed out to the sea, 16 inch, but they did have some other pieces there. I watched them blow some men off the top of now this would be about 6 miles across there, but with glasses I actually saw these bombs go off, and I saw this one man was standing up on this point, actually blown up. It seemed just up and down. At that distance it was almost like slow motion, but I saw it.
Now this was after Bataan fell, the Japanese took over.
This was, yes, when the Japs were coming on down. When they came on to, they took Bataan, we were the second most bombed area in the war. I think Malta was supposed to be first, but we'd have bombing at least 2 a day. But when Bataan fell, and when Corregidor was under siege, they set up artillery pieces. They had over 100 guns, and they shot across on the Corregidor. And that's why that I'd go out and stay on these watches for 36 hours. I'd be on for 36, and I'd be off for about twice that long. And then I'd go back and forth. And it's quite a harrowing experience to have a driver drive me up to change watches. I mean, I remember one officer that just wanted to get out and get some air, just wanted to get out of the tunnel. Regular Army, regular Navy. So he insisted he could go, and got on the way up there, and the new driver didn't know how to get up there. Well, I didn't know how to get up there either in that darkness. I didn't know those roads up and winding up and down. Well, he got lost. And the Japs artillery started up, and that lieutenant commander in the Navy, I thought he was going to kill me because I didn't know how to get up there. And he insisted he'd go to get some air. I was ready to strike an officer, I'll tell you. But things had happened, strange things. I saw them burn up all the currency they had on, all this currency. They didn't want the Japs to get it. I helped dump the silver from the vaults, to take an officer in charge of each truckload or lorry. They'd go down and put it on the lighter boats to take it out and dump it into the bay.
It's still there? It's still in the bay?
Pardon?
Is the silver still in the bay?
Oh no, they tried to fish it all out. As a matter of fact, I went to a banquet given by the ambassador from the Philippines, Romero. I believe that's his name. And he had been the ambassador there for some time, right after the war. And I have a piece that was taken out that he gave that night at the banquet for a souvenir. Everyone had. I still have it at home. It's all corroded and silver peso.
Mm-hmm. Describe life in the tunnel during the siege and the bombing.
Oh well, it wasn't very pleasant, of course, to live in these bunks. I think there were 2-deck bunks, and just jammed all the way up and down the inside of this tunnel, and we'd sleep there. Then we were on 2 meals a day. Found out later we were eating horse meat or mule meat, which at the time I didn't realize it. It didn't hurt the flavor of it, but we'd eat about 10 in the morning and then 4 in the afternoon. The nicest thing about it was I got my weight down real good. And when the war started, I think I weighed 183, and when Corregidor fell, I was about 155, and in top shape physically. Probably haven't been in that good a shape in a long time. Well, I haven't since.
When did MacArthur leave?
Oh, Bataan fell April the 9th. I think he left at least a month before Bataan fell.
Was there a big battle at Bataan when it fell, or was it just a surrender?
They broke the lines. And yes, yes. Oh, of course, the Battle of Bataan, it carried on for months and months and months. And finally, the Japs just were able to break it.
Could you see the battle from where you were?
I could see certain elements of the battle from an observation point. I saw when the Japs tried to infiltrate and come down and come in from the seaside and go, and I saw the discovery of these and gunboats of some type. The Navy had some battles going on with the machine gun. I could see that from 6 or 7 miles away. Mm-hmm. I remember there was one battle going on up by Subic Bay, I think, where the Japs were trying to infiltrate. I believe it was maybe Agaloma Point or something of that kind. And there was one taking place over by Mariveles at the same time. And from the duty, I could see the one by Mariveles. Anyway, just across the channel. Now I reported then, and the duty officer, who was one of these smart regular Navy Annapolis men, who thought they were smart, and all the reserves weren't very smart. And I reported what I could see there, and he says, "You can't see that far. You can't see that far. You can't see." I said, "Well, okay, but I'm saying it, and if you say I can't see that far, then I can still see it." We left it. Finally, he found out that there were 2 battles going on. The thing it spread out that much.
Mm-hmm. When Bataan fell, what was the reaction of the people on Corregidor?
Well, it was pretty bad. And of course, the ones from Bataan were trying their best to get over to the Corregidor. Of course, it had been better off if they had it, because the prisoners taken on Bataan, I mean, the ones that could survive to that point to be prisoners, were rounded up and put in a forced march and marched from there to Camp O'Donnell, which was about 60 kilometers away. And they forced marched them, the Japs did, and gave them no food or water. And when they collapsed, the Japs, if they dropped out, the Japs would kill them, just bayonet them. And at least we didn't have that happen to us, the ones captured on Corregidor. It's bad enough, mind you.
How long after Corregidor fell after Bataan fell that Corregidor fell?
Corregidor fell, I think, May the 6th. It was on a Sunday, and it happened to be Mother's Day, and first week in May, or whenever Mother's Day was in 1942. But which would be about 5 or 6 weeks. April the 9th to May. Well, it would be about a month.
Mm-hmm. What did you do from the time? When did you realize that you had surrendered? What happened?
Well, word came out. Of course, when word came out that Bataan had fallen, we had to report that the Japs continued to shoot Americans for 6 hours afterward. Just shot them, and then finally started taking prisoners. Well, we had the word that we were going to surrender, and we would take off our sidearms or pistols or guns or rifles, take the bolt out and throw them out at the end of the pier or the tunnel. Just stack them out there and throw the bolts over the side of the wall, and that way it would pretty well incapacitate those guns. And I was in a machine gun nest. That wasn't my duty post, but I was there. I mean, I was not on watch at that time. and I saw this column of Japs coming up this walkway on the side of this cliff. That was out at the an escape hatch from Queen Tunnel. I'd gone through that. It was broken type rocks and everything. I'd almost have to get on my hands and knees across some point. But I went out there, and here was a machine gun nest at the end. Well, 2 days before that, I saw them put an automobile with a big mine under it, in case the Japs got there, that mine would go off. Well, but when I was in that, looking out, and saw these Japs coming up with the rising sun or the setting sun, the flag over the top of the tank, and the column coming along, I picked up the phone and I called the duty officer, which happened to be my old lieutenant commander that given me so much trouble so many times. And I reported to him that there was a column of Japs coming up with a tank. He ordered me to go out and meet that column, to go out and meet him. And I said, what? He said, you go out and meet that, and that's an order. Well, I couldn't conceive of it. It was ringing in my head about them shooting up the Americans over 6 hours after, but I was ordered to do it, so I went out, and man, I thought things had really come to an abrupt end as far as I was concerned. But I got out there and saluted, and the little Jap in charge saluted and gave me a little bow, courteous and so forth, and we got up to where all these guns were stacked and the tank couldn't pass it. Well, they pushed this car off as I was standing there, and I didn't even think about that mine being under it. Well, then, when it didn't go off, I mean, this was after they'd gone over the side and nothing happened. It didn't go off. I couldn't imagine why it didn't go off. But I thought, well, that's a close call. So got up, and here was a stack of guns that had been put up there, and he motioned to me and told me to move them. In sign language, I knew what he meant. So I yelled down in this escape hatch and got some, there was a enlisted man by me, and I told him to get some help out there, and we got those things pushed over the side. Then he ordered me to, the Jap in charge told me to get up on top of that tank, and I didn't know why. I thought they were going to kill me or something. I really did. My mind had I died a lot of deaths up there. And I was up there, and here was this flag waving over my shoulders, and sitting there, and caught about 200 or 300 Jap troops behind me, and we were creeping along on that tank, and rounded the corner and looked down below, and that was down what they call bottom side, and saw all these Jap troops in there, and a lot of Americans, which they were kicking and shoving around and beating on, and the tank came to a stop, and this Jap waved me to get down. Then he asked me for a souvenir, but I didn't know what he wanted. I just figured it out later, and I couldn't understand him, so I didn't cooperate. But he finally waved and told me to go on up with where they'd had a bunch of Americans assembled, and told me to go on up there, which I did. Could I just have a word with you?
Sure.
Turn that off?
Sure. Okay.
Well, I rounded the curve, and he told me to leave, and there were several other things that happened during that period. They got a group of American officers together, lined us all up, marched us around, beat us on the head as we'd go, and I was standing by Colonel Trump, who was a chaplain in the Marine Corps. Well, he was convinced they were going to take us all and execute us. And, of course, when he said that, I said, oh, I don't think so. Let's just wait and see what happens. Well, stopped us and had us all take our clothes off. had to strip everything off and put it in a big pile. And then after we got our clothes off, they dismissed us. So we had to try to get our clothes back on, and that was a situation I didn't quite understand. I think really what they were trying to let us know, that we were under their power, we were under their control, and we were supposed to do whatever they told us to do. I saw one Jap enlisted man who loaded a colonel, old colonel, white-haired colonel, had loaded down with his field pack and everything else, had a little whip and was whipping him, making him run along with his stuff, and that type of stuff. And Americans, here was this high cliff. They were jumping off that, killing themselves. It was a brutal time.
Where were you sent to prison? What prison camp were you in?
Well, I went to Bataan. Well, first went into Bilibid prison. Of course, they loaded us into barges not barges, in the hull of a ship that took us from Corregidor into Manila. Dropped us off in the water and made us march all the way through the streets of Manila. And one thing I remember on that was that here we walked 5 or 6 miles. I had a shoe on that wasn't even tied, and it wore blisters on my heel. But someone in this column of several thousand Americans started singing "God Bless America," and all these Filipinos were lining the streets and daubing their eyes and had handkerchiefs and trying to slip us food or something, and the Japs were beating on us and pushing them back. And when this song came forth, and all the Americans in the line took it up, and we marched into Bilibid prison singing "God Bless America," and it was a very touching thing. I was proud I was an American at that time, for sure. And got inside the Bilibid, and altogether I spent a lot of time in Bilibid, but we were transferred to Bataan, and just barely arrived there, and Americans from Camp O'Donnell, which had been survivors from the march and the Battle of Bataan, were thrown in with us. And when we saw them, there were 3 of us already decided we were going to escape, and we escaped them that night. Took off. I was out for 3 months.
How did you escape?
Well, they'd moved us to one camp, but they had the fence up, but they had no water. So then they moved us back the next day, made us march 5 or 6 miles back, with no food or water either. I got water out of a ditch to drink, and got back to the first camp we'd been in, and they didn't have their fences up. So we just scooted out of there, and I ran for 18 miles without stopping. I say 18, I think it was at least 18. Finally, anyway, kept moving along. Then it was Bataan. We crossed over mountains into Dingalong Bay and down to a little river called Magnock River, and there I had dengue fever and was nursed by these Filipinos. And then went on from there down, we were going down trying to get to Bicol Peninsula. And if we arrived there, that was a bunch of guerrillas down there. And I'm sure we'd have been all right if we'd have reached that, but we were caught in the meantime. Some unfriendly Filipinos who had been Japanese-ized, I guess that's the right use, caught us. There were about 80 of them in a posse, and they chased us for about 18 hours and finally caught us and tied us up and then delivered us to the Japs. And it was a long story, but I was court-martialed twice over it. Actually, given a 3-year sentence, and then court-martialed again and given another 3-year sentence. But subject to change at any time, and as I understand it, we were under orders to be shot when we were actually liberated. And the Americans got in there about 24 hours or more before the Japs could carry out those orders.
I thought that escape was a capital offense.
It was.
How come you weren't?
Oh, that's such a long story, and I don't think you had that much time, and I don't think I was either. But when I was captured, there were 3 other Americans who attempted to escape. Now, there were 3 of us who came in there. We were ordered by the American officers, our senior officers, to turn ourselves in as having escaped. They said they would take out reprisals on the whole camp, and we're not going to protect you, and there's stool pigeons in the camp, which there were not. They told us that. You are ordered to turn yourself in. That was my good old friend, the lieutenant commander, that had been my executive officer all the way through. So we turned ourselves in, and we'd written out a confession. And at the time they were interpreting this, 3 other Americans attempted to escape. They caught them. The Americans in the camp caught them. They had guards. That's how serious this escape business was. They caught them and they turned them to the Japs. And the Japs then literally beat them to death before they finally cut their heads off. Their final execution. But they did the initial beating of those 3 in front of us. We witnessed it. The Japs did. And after it was over, there's a little picture over there of my mother. And at one point, I was the oldest, a few months older than the other 2 ensigns. We were all the same rank, but they questioned me first because I happened to be the oldest, since we were all 3 ensigns. And to condense the story very much, got to one point in the interrogation, why did I escape? And we'd seen them, heard them interrogate these others, and I didn't want to, they'd set another example for me. I didn't want any more of that business, and they'd been very, just very firm with the Japs, and just talked back to them, and it got worse and worse. But I said, well, I wanted to get home to my mother at one point, and they had untied my hands at that point. And I reached and pulled that little picture out. And here was a whole room of Jap soldiers. They were, 2 of them were standing there with bloody ropes in their hand and clubs that they'd been beating on these other 3 with, ready to take us on. And I said, well, I wanted to get home to my mother, and I handed the interpreter my mother's picture, and I had been told if I had a chance to show that to do it. So I was trying everything I could. And he handed it to the colonel, Jap colonel in the room. He looked at it, said something, and this whole room that had been just waiting to jump on me, they all started laughing. I don't know what they were laughing at, but they started laughing. And that picture then was handed to the executive officer that was there. And it went all around that room and came back to me. The colonel gave an order. Well, the colonel said something to the executive officer, and he gave a command. They all cleared out, the whole group of them. We sat there, and they brought us some tea and visited with us for 45 minutes, talking about Japan and so forth, and said, we'll someday go home. You can go back to the United States. And then the next day or so, well, we were shipped down to Manila for formal court-martial. And they had a letter in there addressed to the court-martialing board giving 7 reasons why we shouldn't be executed. I heard all this. Now, I don't know, but I think it's substantially actually what happened. But then we waited 3 months. We were on executions. Cell a big part of the time, sleeping on a concrete floor. And we were there. a lot of that time, then we were transferred to another place. And we waited then for a court-martial 3 months later. And court-martial, and at that time we were told that we had been court-martialed 3 weeks earlier, I think it was. That we'd have been executed without any hesitation, but orders from Tokyo had come down to keep the executions and the deaths of the prisoners of war at a minimum. And that at that time, all of the Philippine Islands had surrendered and no resistance left, except some guerrilla activity. And so when we were court-martialed, we were given prison term. So we were put back in the prison camp as special prisoners. We had a red badge we had to pin over our hearts with a little figure on it, which meant we were special prisoners. And they put us in an isolation ward, which was the ward where they kept contagious diseases, all shut in there. But it had its good points because there was a library there. We were given no duties to perform, and they gave us a bed with a mattress and mosquito bar, which we'd never seen those things before so long. And we could read and stay in there. Well, the rest were, we weren't put there immediately. We were put in a special place where I spent 7 months. This was before I got there. And it was a room about 10 by 10, 14-foot ceilings, light on all the time, and slept on a hardwood floor, no bedding except a pillow. And anyway, that's a long, gruesome story. To sit there, had to sit up and face a wall all day, and couldn't talk. Beat on us, they caught us out of position. And
what kind of food were you given?
Rice, just a little thin layer of rice, top of a canteen cup. At first we had 3 of those a day, and a little cup of green soup, tops of vegetable with some salt in it. And then it got down to 2 of those a day. I went from 155 pounds just steadily down until I got to about 100 pounds.
What type of clothes were you given to wear in the prison?
Given a G-string and a little Philippine fatigue denim jacket.
The last question.
That's it.
Yeah, the
That's all we had.
Yeah, the last question. When were you liberated by the Americans?
Liberated on February 4th, 1945. The 6th Army came in, and the Rangers had been in the night before and just shot all out. We were behind this 14-foot wall enveloped it, and we heard all the shooting going on. And the Rangers, then the next day, the chaps sent a notice out that we were being liberated, but stay inside the walls or we'd be killed, and that they were leaving. Well, they didn't have time to get rid of us. They had to get out of there fast. So they put on a blue denim fatigue jacket, which looked like Filipino troops, really. And they marched out the front gate, I guess took off across the Pasig River to form the defense over there that they were making for the defense line, and left us. And they opened up all the galleys and started cooking rice and cooked rice for us.
When did you see your first American?
When? Well, it was that day, same day in the afternoon of the time that the Japs walked away, which was February 4th. And I was at this outside of the wash rack, and there was a boy from Santa Fe by the name of Bandoni. He'd been with the group out there, the big bunch out there that had been captured. So many of them were killed from New Mexico. One of their National Guard divisions was caught out there. Anyway, the 2 of us were out. We saw this board coming off a window through actually there were steel bars in there, but they closed this window so no one could see in or out. And this board was coming out. here the end of this rifle came sticking up out where that board was knocked off. And Bandon, he yelled at him, "Who are you?" And this voice from the other side of the wall said, "I'm a Yank." Who in the hell are you? And he said, "Well, we're Yanks too, and we've been waiting a long time for this." They had bivouacked there without even knowing we were inside. So they came around to the main gate, opened it up, and it was Merry Christmas around there, I'll tell you.
When did you get back to the States?
Right back April the 10th. Now that was February the 4th, and that was quite a little ordeal getting back to the United States. I mean, the war was going on. We were the first unescorted transport that came back from over in that part of the world. The war moved north, and we went down to Biak, New Guinea, and back. They were still flying all these kamikaze planes around when we were leaving. The jets were. So it was one little nervous situation after another that we got back. Our transport, the engines quit for. I think a day and a half we were just floating out. Here we were without escort, floating around out on the water for a day and a half. Finally they got it going again. And then we were under radio silence, so they had to get it fixed or we couldn't move.
Mm-hmm. What'd you do on VJ Day?
Well, of course, I was back in the United States. VJ Day, now, is that Victory of the Japs?
Yes.
Oh, well, I think I watched the newsreels and heard the radio and so forth. I've seen it several times in various recorded news, television and pictures.
Did you celebrate that day?
Well, sure. I really don't know exactly which day it was. I think September 10th, 45?
Let me see. I think they signed the surrender September 1st. Well, I think they surrendered it sometime in August after they dropped the bomb.
I've read about it. Of course, I know it was on the battleship Missionary. And they had Wainwright there.
Did you know Wainwright?
Well, I saw him many times. I saw MacArthur many times.
Okay. Well, it's 5 after 11 now. Okay, sir, thank you.